The time is just gone 5 minutes to 8 p.m. as we continue with tonight's broadcast, tonight's edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Inayet Wadee, as we stay in the company of our Salam Media listeners and also our viewership on YouTube and on Facebook, and also the viewers of ITV who are with us this evening. Now, the second part of the discussion this evening is going to be focusing on the illegal recruitment of South Africans for deployment in the IDF. We have assembled a panel. We've got Professor Nidal, Sakr, March for Justice, joining us out of the United States of America. We've got Stanley Cohen, attorney and human rights activist, and also Yousha Tayob with the Muslim Lawyers Association. To all of you, gentlemen, it's a pleasure. It's wonderful welcoming you to the show this evening. And I see Professor Nidal Sakr is joining in, Stanley Cohen, and also Yousha Tayob will be linking up very, very soon. So to all of you, we welcome you to the show. Stanley, first to you. We appreciate you taking time out and joining us today on Salam Media.
Oh, it's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you very much.
Yes, and also Yousha Tayob. Yousha, if you could unmute your mic. Okay, it has been unmuted. Assalamu alaikum and welcome. Yousha, are you with us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. And I see we are waiting still for Professor Nidal Sakr to join us. But Yousha, let's just start off with you now. And I want to talk a bit about the Gaza docket, because this is extremely important in light of what we are discussing, the illegal recruitment of South Africans for deployment in the IDF. And just a very, very brief introduction and an overview on the Gaza docket and how this is relevant to what we are going to be talking about this evening.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Gaza docket arose out of the events from Cast Lead when the Palestinian Solidarity Alliance and Media Review Network approached the Muslim Lawyers Association to utilize the provisions of the Rome Statute, which allowed us to lay charges against the atrocities, the war crimes, the crimes against humanity, the genocide that was being committed by the IDF in Palestine. And so we filed the affidavit with the complaint, and that was submitted to our local authorities and also to the ICC. The relevant portion of that docket is that in the build-up to preparing the docket, we, through very astute, clever people within our community, one person in particular, was able to identify 73 South African Jews who were boasting about their activities with the IDF. At the time of the lodgement of that docket, the Foreign Military Assistance Act was very bland insofar as what constituted assistance in terms of foreign military. And subsequently, that act was amended to now make it an offense in various respects, and I can read the act and bore all of you. But in essence, even if you were to cook for an IDF soldier or sew a button onto his or her apparel, you could be considered for foreign military assistance in terms of our amended act. At the time, the act was not as detailed. It has now become as detailed. So when we then lodged the docket, there were difficulties in lodging the docket, and there were difficulties with our authorities in assigning a prosecutor, but eventually all of that got done, and we were able to provide the prosecuting authority and the SAPS were screenshots of comments and pictures made by these 73 South Africans indicating their support and or participation of the IDF, some of them displaying the South African flag whilst appearing to be in an IDF military camp of sorts. We also had direct evidence of training at the Norwood and Sandringham SAPS. So these were reservists who were training people, and we provided the police with information. Unfortunately, the investigating officer did not take this matter as seriously as we wanted him to the extent that we ascertained through the process that what these South African Jews were doing as a rite of passage, and they seem all to go to Israel at some point in their matric, just after their matric, whilst in university, as a rite of passage. And what they would do is they would travel from South Africa on a South African passport to a European destination. They would then use their Israeli documents to travel from that European destination to Israel. And so we could not trace the direct trip to Israel based on their South African passport and ID numbers as we would be able to do if they traveled on that passport through the Home Affairs travel system. The investigating officer then apparently, because that was the modus we had and we had no other option, simply requested the Israeli embassy to provide the details of South Africans who traveled to Israel, and the Israeli embassy in Pretoria duly refused cooperation. And again, were not pushed the police did not push to secure that information. So
Yes, Yousha,
we
I just want you
have
to hold
brought,
that thought. Yes, I
sure.
just want you to hold that thought, right? I see Professor Nidal Sakr obviously has gone off the screen. We're going to try and get hold of him. But I just want to bring Stanley Cohen into the discussion now. And Stanley, why this is so relevant and why we are actually discussing this. And Yousha has obviously provided an introduction where we've seen now the recent death of a South African who emigrated from South Africa to Israel, Eliyahu David, and he was killed. Now, this has become a major talking point in South Africa, but I'm sure this is a global phenomenon as well in terms of recruitment from many other countries, by the Israeli government for Jews to come out and fight from other countries, to emigrate from other countries to Israel and to join the Israeli Defense Force.
Well, there's you got to keep it in proper context. To begin with, when it comes to South Africa, there's something very particular and unique about it. You've got the South African Jewish Board of Directors, who I litigated against in Cape Town successfully 7 years ago, which has been a mouthpiece, an agent, a facilitator for Israel since day one. Long before the end of apartheid, Sajbad worked securing weapons in exchange for money and resources and political connection with the Israeli government. So it has always seen itself as a representative of Israel on the ground in South Africa. In that regard, uh, zooming into the most recent loss of life of the young man from South Africa, and I'm not applauding it, but based upon my understanding of what occurred, although he was no longer an active duty military member, in Israel, as a general rule, when you are finished with your active duty, you go into the reserves. Under international law, that makes you a legitimate target in terms of self determination and armed struggle and self defense. Now, Sajbad was the first on the ground in South Africa, as has been APAC and other Israeli lobbying groups and mouthpieces in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in France, and in Germany, and elsewhere, to step up to the microphone, to send its regards to the family, to speak about what had happened, and to extend its condolences. But yet, it was the organization, in my understanding, in terms of other discussions, it has been the facilitator, which has apparently, and I'm not familiar with this particular law in South Africa, broken the law by facilitating the removal or the movement from young men and women from South Africa to illegally go to join the IDF and to fight and commit war crimes, engage in violations of human rights. The same thing holds true in the United States. In fact, there's a lawsuit underway right now, which, among other things, talks about the use of dark money to facilitate transfer and training and weapons between young American Zionists and Israel, in which they go to Israel for a certain period of time, whether they're alleging dual citizenship or not, serve in the Israeli occupation forces, the army, on occasion commit war crimes, but their mere presence is in violation of international law, and the suit in the United States suggests in violation of U.S. law. So, but South Africa is particularly important because we are talking about the shadow of what was apartheid and the presence of what is apartheid. So when the South African government issues an edict that says our young women and men shall not go elsewhere and fight to engage in, let alone war crimes, and there is a conspiracy to violate that law, it creates violations of domestic law in South Africa as well as international law. And it's a great problem in terms of the United Kingdom, in terms of the United States, in terms of France, in terms of Germany, where there are Israeli mouthpieces and facilitators that are making possible, in essence, the very same conduct.
Yes, thank you for that, Stanley. Now, Yousha, I think just following up from what Stanley is saying and questioning the legality of these people going across to Israel to join the IDF. And we've seen it. We've seen it in this country now, the response to Eliyahu David, who was killed, where we see the mouthpieces in South Africa, which Stanley speaks about. We've seen in South Africa the SA Zionist Federation coming through and actually having a go at the government, condemning, saying the deafening silence from the South African government and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation on this issue. So, we can see, I see Professor Nidal Sakr has also joined us, but we can just see from here in terms of how powerful these lobby groups are, and they will go to any length to justify what they are doing. Yes, Yousha, if you could just unmute your mic, please.
My apologies. Sorry, my apologies. So, yeah, I think that's definitely the position. They're trying to defend the indefensible. But related to this story, at the time we lodged the docket, there was a South African advocate who qualified in South Africa by the name of Colonel David Benjamin. Well, he only became a colonel when he joined the IDF, and the particular quotation, I don't have it with me right now, so I'll get to it as close as I can. But Lieutenant Colonel David Benjamin subsequently traveled to South Africa around the time that we lodged the docket, and we brought an application for his arrest on the basis of an article that appeared in Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, in our view, was an authentic source in which the colonel was quoted as saying that they had advised the IDF on the means used in cast lead. And we now know that white phosphorus was used as a weapon. We know there were dime bombs, nail bombs, drone bombs. There was the targeting of schools, hospitals, and the like. So it was clear that there were war crimes committed. And the utilization of these means was specified in a quote appearing in Bloomberg that Colonel David Benjamin, a South African citizen, was party to advising the Knesset and the IDF in regard to the means utilized in cast lead. So there was clear evidence. But our SAPS simply would not move, could not be moved. So despite the support groups and the sympathetic groups, it also appears that our SAPS and NPA want to become very, very technical about the Foreign Military Assistance Act. And so this is aiding these groups, because I read an article recently in which they talk about the mercenaries and the failure to prosecute. The failure to prosecute gives them the energy to continue doing this. And it's as Stanley has said, it's this rite of passage that they travel, and somehow the automatic Israeli citizenship entitles them to participate in killing lesser beings, or who they are taught to be lesser beings, and they come from a history where they know what lesser beings are. So this Jewish boy comes from a family that knew apartheid. He's probably too young to know what it was, but he's certainly been educated in the process so that he can willfully, actively participate in these acts of aggression as a soldier for an oppressive Zionist apartheid regime. because he's been taught in that way, and these lobby groups are facilitators of it. It's all part of this big plan. It's all part, and the unfortunate part is our prosecuting authority and police are just playing into their hands continuously. We just never seem to get the relief we're seeking, despite extensive evidence. There could be no better case than Lieutenant Colonel David Benjamin. Apart from the lobby groups, we know they exist and we know what they do. We know the operations of the Jewish National Fund in this country through the Jewish community in this country, and yet our government is doing nothing active to implement the Foreign Military Assistance Act, or to ban, as I've previously called, the banning of these organizations, complete banning of them. They should not be allowed to operate in this country.
Well, shukran for that, Yousha. I see Professor Nidal Sakr has joined us. Professor Nidal, we have been talking about this young South African who was killed in East Jerusalem, but also at the same time, what is important for us to understand and what we need to shed light on is on the very dangerous and the escalating situation that is taking place in Jerusalem, in Al-Aqsa, and we are led to believe that the young South African was killed in East Jerusalem. So it's against that background that one needs to also take this discussion further. And just your thoughts, Professor Nidal.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very pleased to be with my dear friend and brother Stanley and brother Yousha. Well, we need actually to always put things in perspective. We know that this is a legitimate terrorist occupation that has no legitimacy whatsoever, that was founded by very arbitrary relative laws that do not have any basis in international human rights or international law or even human decency. And they have pattern, and that pattern is they always try to create status quo. And that status quo, like no matter how outrageous it is, no matter how against the very fabric, fundamental fabric of humanity it is, by keep enforcing that very devious status quo, that they just make it a reality over time. They just keep lying and lying and lying until people like accept that lie. We must remember that the situation right now is the same problem that we've had for the last, quote unquote, almost like 100 years. The Palestinian issue is centered mostly on the issue of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. Gaza is part of the Holy Land. However, as we saw in the last confrontations and the last Gaza war, that was the sword of Jerusalem. So the issue of Jerusalem and the Palestinian presence in Jerusalem and the sanctity and the centrality of Jerusalem to the Palestinian issue and to the entire human community, basically, is fundamental. So we're talking about Gaza today. Of course, the atrocities, the crimes that are committed against Gaza in particular have been going on for over 20 years. They've been going on for actually much longer than that, but the brutality that we see has been for like 20 years, and the world community has not done anything about it. So now Gaza, it became like, kind of like the world just doesn't care for it anymore. And the Israelis are using Gaza as quote unquote distraction from what's happening on the ground in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is, just like I said, is at the heart of the human community, regardless if you're Muslim, Palestinian, Jewish, Christian, or just like a citizen of this free citizen of the world. They've been, as we see in Sheikh Jarrah, as we see in the different areas surrounding Al-Haram al-Qudsi, all the neighborhoods of Jerusalem and so forth, there is a very massive campaign of basically uprooting Palestinians, demolition of all the Palestinian landmarks, homes, cemeteries, and so forth. And it has escalated actually in the last few months and the last couple of years, and has taken a very dangerous turn. Brother Stanley, for example, always post news about about Palestinian children at the age of 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13 getting shot, fatally shot by Israeli soldiers and left bleeding to die in front of cameras, sometimes for up to 45 minutes. And the paramedics and the ambulances are being even blocked from attending to those shot Palestinians. And the world community is not even like making any news about it. We had an incident this weekend where Fadi Abu Shkhadim, a personal friend of mine, one of the landmarks of Jerusalem, one of the landmarks of Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the most peaceful, kindest, and happiest people you can ever meet in your life, who is actually at the same time, he frequents Al-Aqsa 5 times a day, but also like he's a teacher at one of the schools inside Al-Haram Al-Qudsi, and he witnessed many of his students who are 10, 12, 11 being imprisoned, being killed, being attacked, and so forth. And eventually, like he had to take matters in his own hand this weekend, and we saw the expiration of this South African terrorist. And let's call it for what it is. Israel is a terrorist, illegitimate, illegal entity, exists by absolutely relative and subjective laws or resolutions by UN, which is created by the victors of the Second and the First World War. And it was created just like as a forced entity in a place where it does not belong. So just like, the soldier who was killed, everybody else actually in Palestine does not belong in Palestine. They just came from somewhere, and now they're trying to make a claim to a property, to a land, to a heritage, to a history that does not belong to them and belong to somebody else's. So we need to keep this in perspective. Yes, what's going on in Gaza is very, disastrous, and it's a crime that's been going on for long, and the world community is very much complacent in all the crimes that are taking place against Gaza. It's by no means, new. Stanley and I and many people we've been involved in those war crime tribunals and war crime investigations and reports and so forth for at least 20, 30 years in Gaza and other parts of Palestine. However, what is taking place right now in Jerusalem should actually be looked at very closely. We should keep it at the forefront and the center of the world attention. This thing is bound to escalate. This thing is bound actually to destabilize the entire world and the entire world peace. Israel is not only committing its crime against Palestinians. Israel right now, we know that it's been complacent and involved in the crimes against Uyghur Muslims by China, against the the genocide of Muslims in India. We know the Zionist platforms like Facebook, Google, and so forth, the involvement in crimes against America and the insurgents and the other crimes Trump has committed against the American people. So basically, Israel is very destabilizing factor right now, is the hotbed for terrorism, is the base for terrorism, and the Palestinian people are just at the forefront of the world community suffering from this Israeli terrorism. We cannot allow this to continue. I don't care what administration we have, whether it's Biden, whether it's Democrats, whether it's Republicans. This is an issue that we cannot be silent about anymore. The incident this weekend with the expiration of this terrorist, murderous South African so-called soldier and so forth, actually sheds the light that you have a collection of the scums of the earth from everywhere. Some of them actually are not even Jews, and they try to claim Judaism. Somebody like Avigdor Lieberman, who came to Palestine without even being Jew, but then his politics and his personal interest made him make such claim. And now we have basically the worst that humanity has to offer, all gathered in one place called Palestine to try to claim that it is theirs and try to change facts, history, religion, heritage, and so forth. We cannot allow this to continue, and we must call it for what it is, and we must actually unite from all over the world. I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 of us. We come from different parts of the world, and behind us we have billions of people who are freedom-loving, justice-loving people from all walks of life, from all faith, from all backgrounds, and we cannot allow this threat to humanity continue and even getting worse by the day.
Yes, shukran for that, Professor Nidal. And just to bring Stanley into the discussion now, there's just so much that Professor Nidal and both Yousha have said, and talking about complacency, talking about the lack of political will, which Yousha has alluded to on the part of the government, the national prosecuting authorities. Now, Stanley, just from your side, and just to understand, some of the legal issues surrounding governments and this lack of political will, to act. Because, we've spoken briefly about the lobbies and how powerful these lobbies groups are in terms of how they influence governments, as we've seen in this case here as well, crying foul to the government, urging the government to do something, and just to look at governments in general and how governments respond to this type of behavior.
And this
Well,
addresses to whom?
look, the Israeli work worldwide has been very effective and very efficient. And while people talk about exercising monetary play or exercising political lobbying will and power and authority, they have successfully been able to convince legislative powers through any variety of political approaches to ignore, to evade, to avoid extant laws that are on the books that should be applied. For example, in the United States, you have the Arms Export Control Act. The Arms Export Control Act is very clear. It requires the President of the United States to report to Congress to indicate that weapons being provided from not just the 3.5 billion or 3.8 billion a year from the United States to Israel, but the weapons independent of the cash that go to Israel, that they're being used in compliance with international law. And that if there's a violation of human rights, if there's a violation of international law, if there's a violation of law against war, the funding is supposed to be frozen. There's supposed to be an independent investigation. Yet over the course of all the years of the Arms Export Control Act, it's been applied to Israel. Almost no president has ever reported to Congress. And when Congress has moved to try to force the president to comply with it, and they've sought action by the courts have said it's a presidential issue. We have a separation of powers issue. So the Israeli lobbyists in the United States, like other governments, have taken many approaches. They've taken the political approach. They've taken the financial approach. They have taken the approach in local communities. They have taken the approach of treaties. They've taken the approach of economic exchange to basically render numb the laws that are on the books right now, which if they were applied, would shut down the killing machine that the IDF is, to the degree as along with the illegal settlers, the criminal settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories, from using foreign money, from using foreign influence, from using foreign weapons as part of the genocide in Palestine. So they've been very effective, very efficient. And then when you have an incident such as this, when a South African, in violation of South African law, goes to Palestine, becomes part of the occupation force, engages in no doubt war crimes, is held accountable under the law of war, and is a, quote, legitimate target under the international law. When he loses his life, the world recoils and rebels. South Africa's panicked. Everyone sends their regards, but no one says a word about what he had done, how he got there, what he was doing while he was there. And that holds true whether the people coming and picking up arms are from the United States, are from South Africa, are from Britain, are from France, are from the Western world. And that's the real problem. Most people focus on, naively, they say Israel controls the United States. Not true. And in fact, that claim plays into the hands of the Zionist lobby. What they do is they very quietly and very directly impact political power, spending priorities, the nullification of extant law, and it allows business as usual.
Yes, thank you for that, Stanley. Yousha, if you could unmute your mic. Just looking at this MRN statement that has been issued now, there have been two issues that have been raised. And, you spoke a bit about the NPA or the lack of political will, but also looking at the illegality in terms of South African law. We have got a law which is called the Foreign Military Assistance Act. And this obviously is in violation of that act. But also at the same time, what the MRN is saying, in violation of the human rights and values of the South African Constitution. And going further, saying that organizations like the South African Zionist Federation, like the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, enjoying impunity in South Africa.
Yeah, so that's what I alluded to earlier. Considering our history, it just doesn't make sense that these organizations that promote Zionism, which is apartheid, which is allowed to perpetrate war crimes is allowed to exist in this country. And this is, I mean, it goes well beyond political will. So, I think recalling our ambassador but continuing economic relations is a contradiction. Um, and it took the unions to stop offloading goods from Israel at harbors to bring attention to the matter. So there was no decisive action on the part of our government. And unfortunately, I'm personally in the zone where our government simply speaks, and I think it's for the reasons that Stanley advances, is that they have quietly and directly already gotten to the people in power to not do anything decisive about it, and that's the difficulty. So, how an organization, as you've mentioned, those organizations can continue to exist in this country is entirely confusing, considering our history. So, yeah, I think the MRN are spot on. But how our government can continue to allow these organizations to exist does not make sense. And I mean, there's the related issue that's also been going on for a while, that Israeli citizens do not require a visa to travel to South Africa, yet Palestinians do. And I think that's an ongoing battle that's being fought by a number of organizations. But it just shows you the contradiction between words and action. Recalling your ambassador may or may not have an effect, but it was the unions that drove the economic embargoes, not the government. So the government, despite recalling the ambassador recently, have not ended the trade relations with Israel.
Yes, and I see even the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has issued a similar statement and also expressing similar sentiments to that of the MRN. Now, Professor Nidal, we're talking about governments and how these governments play into the hand of the Zionist entity of the Zionist state of Israel. But it's not only countries like South Africa. We're not only talking about countries like the United States of America, but we're talking right across the world. And when you're talking right across the world, this includes countries in the Muslim world. Because, we've seen the Emirates, we've seen Morocco, we've seen Sudan, we see even in Libya now with the elections taking place, Khalifa Haftar talking about normalizing a relationship with Israel as part of his campaign, as part of his election campaign.
When I talk about Israel, I'm not talking about that artificial entity that claims Tel Aviv as its capital. When I talk about Israel, I talk about all the entities that were created by colonization, especially like by the British in particular. So Israel comes in different forms, out of Abu Dhabi, out of Riyadh, out of Rabat, and so on and so forth. So we should not be disillusioned by that all of these entities actually were created by the same superpowers for the same purpose, having loyalty to the same power that created them. And they're all like, one version of the other. So you're absolutely right when you mentioned that UAE. UAE is basically a hotbed of terrorism. Look at all of the wars that we have in Africa, look at the genocides that we have all over the world, and UAE funding that's in the Central Africa, Mali, and of course, like the Arab Spring sabotage and everything else. So yeah, it's they're all like one version or another of Zionism. I don't care what they call themselves. I don't care what their name is. Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, Benjamin Netanyahu. They're all just different versions. They're all serving the same agenda, the same purpose, and so forth. However, when we talk about governments, we must always remember that in a banana republic world that we have today, governments basically are made of some corrupt politicians who are self-centered and look for personal interests. They only cave in to political action committees and lobbyists. The vast majority of the people of the world, actually, which do have much more power, only if they organize and only if they become informed, only if they take action. But we cannot allow just few corrupt people to basically control what's happening around the world. We've seen in the Arab Spring where people got fed up with those like corrupt political elite, we overthrew them. I mean, we just like had a sea of people that we overthrew them. And you know what? Arab Spring is not over. Arab Spring is not only limited to the Arab world or the 5-6 different countries where it broke out. I think Arab Spring is going to be like global phenomena very soon, with all the extremism that we see right now in Europe and what's so-called these populist governments everywhere that are very racist and basically made of bigots and hateful people, whether it's in the UK or anywhere else. You know, with all the failure in governance that we observe by all of these failing governments all over the world, there is an opportunity right now that we can all start like getting ahead of the curve in terms of today's reality. You know, making sure that justice and freedom and human rights take precedent over all else. The whole world is being actually shaken and redrawn after the COVID you know, crisis and so forth. So we do have you know, now opportunity to change this situation. In the US, we have very significant changes right now with the progressive you know, wing of the Democratic parties, and many people coming to office in the last few years and so forth. So there are many positive changes that are taking place, but we need to make sure that the momentum grows bigger and faster, and we need to have that grassroots culture. You know, you cannot look at problems in the world and say, you know what, there's nothing I can do. This is political action groups and lobbyists and governments, so forth. Actually, that's the furthest from the truth. They try to make you think and feel that you're helpless. But you know what? If everyone does something every day, you know, you will see a sea of change taking place, and there is no reason why we should have like 2-3 people in every country that are outspoken, everybody else just waiting for them to speak on their behalf.
Yes, and also Stanley, I think just looking at you personally, because I know you've done a lot of work and you've done, you know, a number of high-profile cases as well, and just looking at your involvement and your position at this point in time in the United States of America, and interesting, I actually went on your website where, because of the type of work that you do, and you have been said to be controversial, but at the same time a target. And where you said that the US government will target you until the day you die because of the position and the stand that you take.
Well, look, anyone who challenges Israel, anyone who challenges the United States, anyone who challenges European colonial projects, anyone who challenges racism, who challenges Islamophobia, anyone who challenges xenophobia, anyone who challenges the status quo ante becomes a target. And throughout the world, we are in a period of time where governments do not hesitate, whether it's by drone, whether it's by arrest, whether it's by political persecution, to seek to silence people, because they understand in a world that is increasingly brown, that is increasingly young, that is increasingly diverse, that is increasingly unwilling to accept a silence or to be silent and thus complicit, that they are under siege and will increasingly be even more under siege in the decades to come. Faced with the additional problems of environmental catastrophes, faced with additional problems of economic, the attempt by a handful of countries to control the economic balance and health and welfare of the world. So yes, we are at a particular dangerous crossroad in our history of the world as a people. Forget about flags and borders and oaths and anthems and all of those artificial confines which tries to limit us to me and now, here and now. We are at a crossroad where we are challenging throughout the world governments. We are challenging monarchies. We are challenging traditional notions of life and love and faith and power. And governments are not going to sit back. They will not sit back in silence. They understand they're under siege like not before. The world is smaller now. You have a place and community where in Central Africa, a young boy or a young girl can speak contemporaneously to someone in China, to someone in the United States, to someone in Belgium, about politics and about life, and can organize and can move together in international coalitions. That threatens the status quo ante. People have to go into this with open eyes. They have to understand, like in South Africa during apartheid, like in Israel during 70 years of genocide and ethnic cleansing, like in the rest of the world where there are growing fascist movements, where there are, you know, I find it interesting, in Egypt yesterday, El-Sisi announced with a great deal of applause the end of the special security state. That doesn't mean the tens of thousands of political prisoners are being released. It doesn't mean the end of the special courts, the security courts. We see recent security courts worldwide. We now see in the UK an attempt to further stifle speech by making it a crime to support, to speak about Hamas. So out of desperation, out of this drive to try to control a narrative that is not theirs to control, governments are coming for activists, governments are coming for dissent, governments are coming for diversity in ways they've not before. In some places that means assassination, in other places that means economics, in other places that means stealing your liberty, in other places it means building more and more walls. The reality of it is, if you challenge the state, no matter your faith, no matter your color, no matter your gender, no matter your location, they will come for you. Go into it with open eyes and understand this is a battle for the heart and soul of the world, not just one unique place, although there are clearly places such as Palestine, such as Yemen, such as places in South Africa, or in Africa, such as in South America, that are particularly in tune right now and under siege. The entire world is at a crossroad. And people, young women and men in particular, are going to have to make a choice. They're going to have to go in with open eyes. They're going to have to go in with warm hearts and understand there can be a terrible price to pay.
Yes, Stanley. Yousha, I think what Stanley is saying very, very important in terms of what is happening in other countries around the world where the government is coming or going against activists. Now, looking at us here in South Africa, we know we've got powerful lobby groups as well. We've got a civil society, we've got trade unions. We look at the various Palestine solidarity organizations right across the entire country who have been able to make an impact to a certain extent. Not to the extent that I think many would want, and you cited the example about visas, for Palestinians and no visas for Israel, and some tokenism that has taken place in terms of justice, but a lot more powerful. But also looking at some of the risk factors, because we know that these are powerful lobbies that are operating with the government. When we're talking about the Zionist Federation and the Jewish Board of Deputies, and looking at some of the risk factors that we face, the activist community face, and also at the same time civil society at large, who are obviously anti what the Zionist entity is doing to the people of Palestine.
Yeah, I don't know whether you're looking for an answer on that question, but I mean, it's quite clear that if we look globally, and I don't mean to exclude other oppressed communities, but as Muslims, we see the persecution of Muslims in every country, and our duty as Muslims is to establish Allah's law on this earth, is to establish justice on this earth, and the difficulty you have is that when you try and engage with these entities, as the MRN press statement earlier indicated, is they want to divert the issues. If we stick just to the principles that Stanley speaks about, and if we were able to actively engage people publicly in their belief systems and their political systems and their economic systems, and show be position where we could show them the wrong of their ways, because one of the purposes we are established on this earth as Muslims is to establish Allah's law, and we know that the concept of justice and the concept of removing oppression and treating people properly in all ways, in catering for their needs in all ways, is the teaching. So these organizations that you speak of in South Africa do good work. There were a few incidences recently that brought some sort of embarrassment for us as Muslims. I don't want to go into that tonight, but for us, it's a struggle to establish Allah's law on this land, and you can have no doubt that the entire world, subject to a few people, will accept that position, simply because that morality does not exist, that dignity does not exist, and they don't understand the beauty of this religion. And unfortunately, we can't call on any Muslim countries who show that expertise, because if we had, we would have the complete model. So yeah, I think these organizations do good work, but I also think that as Muslims we must be reminded that this is a struggle to establish Allah's law, for we are His slaves and we've been commanded. the incident that occurred clearly embarrassed those who don't see Palestine as a political struggle. And so for us, it's the establishment of the removal of oppression and the establishment of Allah's laws. But as Stanley says, you can expect the persecution when you're on the right. You have to expect the persecution when you're on the right, because we don't play into their interests. We want everybody to have a roof over their head. We want everybody to have food. We want everybody to be able to practice freedom of religion and other freedoms. And that's not achievable because the mindset of those in power. In fact, the first words I actually heard it at university when I started many years ago from the professor was power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think those words ring true. We're living in that time and age. We always have, but we've got to do something about it. And as Muslims, the obligation is substantially higher.
Yes. Now, Professor Nidal, while all of this is playing out, where does this leave the people of Palestine in their struggle for justice and their struggle against the oppression that they've had to endure for a very, very long time now?
As a Palestinian myself, I can tell you that the Palestinian situation and being targeted by basically world powers is indeed, although it's very brutal and there is much suffering, but it is also an honor that we stand on the front line in defense of humanity, in defense of everything that stands like for justice, for freedom, and so forth. We know it's very well embedded in history and in Islam as well, that for standing for justice, truth, equality, human rights, and so forth, that's what makes you, quote unquote, chosen or elite, not in the like racial or religious sense, but in being basically, you have this responsibility that's thrown at you, not by choice, but you have two choices. You either like stand for whatever responsibility that's being thrown at you, or you just like, fail to live by it. As Palestinians, we have no choice. We have to stand to defend human rights, justice, freedom, and so forth by defending Palestinian rights, but also we're standing for the entire world community. When we had the war on Gaza recently, there was actually more Jews protesting against the war on Gaza than even Palestinians in that rally. And if it wasn't for Palestinians being steadfast in explaining their cause and what they stand for, we wouldn't see that massive change that's taken place all over the world. People like Stanley, like myself, like Yousha, like all of us, we came to life, understand that we are here for a number of years and that we're here for a purpose. And that purpose is basically to stand for what's right. It doesn't matter what we endure, what we suffer, what we face. It's not going to take anything away from us. Actually, it's going to make us even more steadfast and believe more in what we stand for, and more even determined to live by it. That makes it even, at least speaking for myself and for the brothers that I know, that makes it even more worthwhile. We're not here just to, see things, wrong things happening without doing anything about it. We choose to speak out. We choose to exercise our humanity and to stand for our fellow brother in humanity and stand for the justice. It doesn't matter if it's in Palestine or anywhere else. Palestine happened to be the focal point, but we speak for causes of justice all over the world.
Yes, I see we've got about 6 minutes to go before we close off, and I'm going to go around to the panelists just to give you 2 minutes each. Just your final thoughts on what we have been discussing, starting with you, Stanley.
Yeah, I am often asked by especially young women and men activists, particularly around the issue of Philistine, how do I keep my spirits up? How do we keep going? There are those days where that seem dark and impossible. And my message is today the same message it was when I was told as a young activist decades ago. The struggle is long, the struggle is hard, but we have the good fight ahead of us. We will prevail. I am convinced more so now than ever that we will prevail in Palestine. We will prevail against the beast of militarism and economic and environmental exploitation worldwide. And to the young women and men out there, there are those days that are dark, but there are many more that are wonderful. There are many more where we understand what the fight is about, feel good about it, and no matter what it may take from us personally, we will continue worldwide for truth, for justice, for humanity.
Thank you for that, Stanley. Yousha, you've got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I need that much. I think we've said what we can say. The bottom line for me is actions speak louder than words. And we've heard lots of words from this government, but we've seen very little action. In reading these articles, we're one of the foremost countries with this type of legislation, and we're not enforcing it. We have in the pipeline the prevention of mercenary acts, which hasn't yet been enforced, has been in legislation since 2006. And having read that article just in preparation for today, just a startling fact that I didn't know about was they talk about 1.7 million South African private security companies deployed abroad. And these are South Africans who were with the SANDF, who post 1994 did not want to serve this government, who then went into private security. But there's 1.7 million South Africans out there committing war crimes, or rendering security services, killing people because of their specialized knowledge. This government can do something about it. There's legislation to support it, and its conduct, recalling the ambassador, continuing trade. Visas for Palestinian citizens, none. None for Israeli citizens. It's just a complete contradiction in terms. And so I think we need to be alive to the fact that words don't achieve results. They've got to put those words into action. And we'd like to see it. And I mean, the closing word to those who are Muslim that hear this: remember, you are Muslim first. You know your obligations, not for me to spell them out to you. You know your obligations, and we need to maintain that identity and practice upon it completely.
Well, shukran for that, Yousha. Professor Nidal?
Yes, I'd like just to simplify things and just remind all of us that from the minute we are born for a purpose, and that purpose is the moment right before we take our last breath before we leave this world, and what happened between these two moments. I think the most important thing for all of us is that when that final moment comes and we look back at our lives, to have a smile and to be at peace with what we have done in that journey. There is good and there is evil. Good is universal value, is universal common goal, and so forth. Evil, we all know what evil is. Anything that goes against human nature, against the goodness that we are all born with, is evil. And evil against one is evil against all. We have the right to choose, and we have the choice between which side to be on. And we can basically choose whatever side we want. That's our freedom of choice, quote unquote. But when that final moment comes, some of us are going to go with a smile, and some won't. So let's just be mindful of this. And it doesn't matter what status you have, what governments, what lobbies, what claims you make, how much money you make, and so forth. It all comes to that one final moment. You're either going to leave this world in peace or in misery and shame.
Well, shukran for that. And to Stanley Cohen, Yousha, Tayob, and Professor Nidal Sakr, we do appreciate you taking time out and spending the last hour in the company of Salam Media, our listeners, our viewers, and also in the company of our ITV viewers this evening. We wish you all the best. And once again, please be safe and please take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition, another broadcast on Wednesday night with myself, Inayet Wadee, and just a fair amount of ground that we were able to cover on this topic of Gaza, on the issue of the Gaza docket, and also about this young South African who was killed in Israel, but also at the same time doing some introspection, looking at our government and what our government needs to do. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your company. So from myself and the team here at Salam Media, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.